My name is Kayleen Lamb, and I'm here with my colleague Charlotte Vandervoort, and we are librarians here at Lewis Library. In case you missed it, we are in the first of our series called Review Ready. And this essentially is about trying to figure out, maybe you have a research idea and you want to find out what you have capacity and time for when doing a review. So we will go ahead and get started. Today, we'll be discussing 6 different kinds of reviews that you can choose from. I will say 6 is not an exhaustive number. There are other reviews out there, but these are the ones that we tend to get questions about the most. So we'll talk a little bit about where these reviews fall on the hierarchy of evidence. We will then talk about how we can be ethical when we write our reviews. We will get to answer some questions and then do like an activity to figure out which review is right for you. And then we'll review some tools, answer any questions you have, ask you to fill out a survey, and then, of course, eat some food. So that is on our agenda for today. If you all have questions in the meantime and you want to stop me, that would be great because I don't need to talk the entire time. So feel free to just raise your hand or let us know what you're wanting. We asked you a few questions. This is what our class is made of today. So as you can see, here are the 6 review types that we'll be talking about. And these are the ones that you all were most interested in. And some of you didn't know, and that's totally fine. We also asked to see kind of how experienced you were with reviews. And less experienced here and a lot of, I haven't done any of this, but you're interested in. And this is a great place for all of you to be. So whether or not you've had a lot of experience or not much experience, we hope that you're able to get something out of today. Okay, something that I like to do with each of my classes is to tell a story. So just bear with me here. But I'd like to tell us a tale. This is our setting. We've got Lewis Library, December 1st. Maybe there's snow on the ground. This is in the not so distant future, or maybe the not so distant past. And we have some key players. We have 2 friends. They've got an idea. And we have 1 friendly librarian. So this is kind of a tale as old as time. 2 students walk in and they say, "Hey, Kayleen, I have this great idea for research, and we were wanting to do something, and winter break is coming up, and so we would like to perform a systematic review." And I say, "Cool, let's talk about that." And I say, what kinds of what topic do you want to do? And you're like, "Well, we were thinking something to do with diabetes." Okay. How many you wanting to do systematic review? How many people are you wanting to have on your team? And they say, "Oh, just us 2." I say, "Okay. What's your timeline for this?" And they'll say, "Well, we'd really like to get it done over Christmas break." And that's when we're like, wait a second. From one of those conversations, which we have a lot, this class was born. We tend to have a lot of people who have ideas and good research topics, but they have no idea what it actually takes to do something like a systematic review. And so I hope by the end of today, you know a little bit about the rigor as well as the timing and things that are needed to actually perform a good review, because nothing is worse than putting in time and effort and whatever spare time you have as students or faculty, spending all this time on a review and then not being able to actually do anything with it because it was done poorly. There's a lot of bias in it, and so you can't actually publish anything from it. So we're hoping to catch you now before you put in any effort. This is our friendly evidence-based pyramid. Has anybody seen this before? Yes. Raise of hands if you've seen it. Okay, cool. A smattering. So essentially, it is a hierarchy of evidence that is in the literature. So at the top, you have things like meta-analysis and other kinds of evidence synthesis. Then you have things like our randomized control trials, which is our experimental studies. Those are the ones that are like placebo, double-blinded, those kinds of things. And then everything in the gray is more of our observational studies. So the idea is the lower on the pyramid you go, the more research might be out there, but maybe not as rigorous. And so as we get further up the pyramid, we might have less and less of that research, but it tends to be a higher rigor and have better evidence. So when we get things to like our meta-analysis, these are the reviews and the things that people look out to write their clinical practice guidelines, which then impact care. These are our interpretation of where these reviews fall in this evidence-based pyramid, from meta-analysis all the way down to our narrative review. And you'll see this as we go along today. So before you even start any sort of review, there's some pre-review tasks. One, of course, is actually having a research idea. That's really good. You'll want a team. But what we really like to emphasize in these research consultations with you is making sure that you conduct a preliminary research. So this means looking to see who else might be writing on your topic and have already registered any protocols. Again, nothing is worse than you're like, awesome, we're going to do this research project, and then you find out someone has already published on your topic after you've put in a lot of effort. This actually just happened to us librarians. We were performing a scoping review. We got through a lot of the planning stages. We were getting ready to write our protocol. We did one last sweep of the literature and found someone in January of 2026 had published a scoping review on our topic. Okay, so you want to make sure that you are very, very careful, or you waste like 2 months of meeting time, which is fine. I'm not bitter. From there, you also want to start thinking about like how you're going to manage your data. So what citation manager are you going to use? How are you going to keep things organized? Any sort of review tools that you're going to do, as well as checklists for like evidence bias and critical appraisal. So these are important because you want to have a plan at the beginning so everybody's on the same page. And then, of course, you may have to get buy-in depending on who you are working with. Regardless of which review you might choose to do, we want you to make sure that you are performing that review with transparency and integrity. And so each of these reviews are a little bit different on the standards that you're supposed to do. But there are some general guidelines. Number one, making things like your conflict of interest known. So when you're writing that paper, you want to make sure that you address that. Reproducibility is a big one, especially when we start talking about evidence synthesis, like our scoping reviews, our systematic reviews. You should be able to put in your paper the exact methodology that you have done, so a librarian could copy your search string and essentially perform the same review. If you ever are, and this is an aside, if you are ever looking at like a review and you're wondering, is this a good review? Look to see whether or not your systematic or your scoping review has actually told you what search terms they've done and which databases they've searched in. If it's like, we searched for cancer in all the applicable databases, not a good systematic review. It's not reproducible, maybe choose something else. Other things that we'll talk about are things like registering your protocols. A lot of this is optional unless you're doing a systematic review or meta-analysis. And then, of course, we want to make sure that whenever we are performing our review, we want to reduce bias as much as we can. Again, because you don't want to go through a long period of time and effort to do something, and then your publisher that you're trying to get published with are like, we can't publish this because it is full of bias. We'll talk a little bit about that later. But we're going to play myths and misconceptions. So I'm going to say statement. I want a thumbs up if you think it is true. I want a thumbs down if you think it is false. And you can do a side, like just a line. If you are it depends or maybe. Okay? We good for a game? Okay. Reviews are all the same. True, false, it depends. False. Good job, those of you who said false. Each review has a different purpose. There are similarities within reviews, like an umbrella review and a mapping review. Very similar, but have different purposes. There's an article that kind of groups them into 7 large families. But for the most part, how you perform a search is not the same. Next one. I can finish a review in a semester. True, false, it depends. Oh, we got some trues, we got some falses, and some maybes. This is an it depends. So depends on what kind of review you want to do. The more rigorous, the more comprehensive you want it. So the higher up on that evidence pyramid, the longer your timeline. I need at least 20 good articles to do a review. False, true, it depends. No, actually. Even if you don't have very many results, you can still publish your review. Some of the good systematic reviews are like, we looked at 4 because it's all we had. And that means there needs to be more research. Only the last 5 to 10 years of research matters. True, false, it depends. It depends. So it depends on the review type. It depends on if you're doing something exhaustive. It depends if it's a rapid review and you're trying to gather evidence of something that has just happened. So you just need to make sure that you have any sort of rationale for any limitations that you put on your review. All right, last one. A review is just a summary. True, false, it depends. Got some it depends, got some falses. This one's more false. So reviews, yes, help us summarize, but there's more to their purpose and their methodology. This is not a paper that you're writing for a class, okay? It includes assessment of critical appraisal. It also has things like bias. So depending on your review type, these can be very high levels of evidence, and so it's not just a summary. So thank you. Round of applause to everyone. Yeah. Half-hearted clapping, it's fine. Okay, so I'm going to do like 2 more parts, and then you will stop listening to me and you can listen to Charlotte, whose melodious voice will teach you lots of good things. But we're going to go through this flow chart to help us decide which review you should use. So if you were thinking, these are questions that you want to ask yourself. So do you want to gather all info or data on a topic? And by all, I mean like all. And if your answer is no, then you're looking at a literature or a narrative review. This one's kind of the lower end on the rigor, but this is kind of what you hear of when we talk about like, I'm going to perform a literature review. Or if you're looking in PubMed and it says something like, oh, we did a review of the literature, or this is just a review. So most people, when they say, I'm going to do a review, this is kind of like your general one. And so it's essentially looking at a research question or questions, and it's usually on a single topic and it's a short time frame. So this is like your conventional review. So you're very purposeful in what you're wanting to search, like the most current literature, in which case, limiting to 5 to 10 years makes a little more sense. This one also has a quick turnaround. Even though it is lower on the evidence pyramid, that's not to say you cannot be systematic while you search. So you want to make sure that you still keep track of things in a systematic way. You'll usually use databases. Sometimes you'll use gray literature, which is things that are not in databases. So things like C2C guidelines, data from different places, thesis dissertations, posters, publications, things that, might be from other students or other people in your field. So depending on your purpose of your literature review, you may or may not search what we call gray literature, things that couldn't be found in a database. And then sometimes people will actually find an article they like and then look at that reference and then do some of those reference searching. But none of these are a requirement, right? So when you're talking about your literature or your narrative review, there's not formal guidelines for it. So each person does it a little bit differently, and that's okay. And then likewise, methodology of how you performed your review doesn't tend to be explicit in the article. So it says we searched relevant databases, we used these kinds of terms, but it doesn't necessarily give you any search string. So I, as a librarian, cannot usually read a narrative or literature review and know exactly how someone did something, okay? That doesn't mean that it's still not helpful, right? So these are the steps for our literature review. We've already talked a little bit about the plan. You then would create your search string, search databases, a more comprehensive literature review searches 2 to 3 databases. If you're searching like only PubMed, like expand your horizons, guys. Um, you would then export and manage your citations. You would do some sort of critical appraisal of the articles that you found, and then you would present or report your findings, write your report, select a journal, and submit. Super easy, right? So if you don't have a lot of time um, or bandwidth, literature narrative reviews are great. And people will look at literature and narrative reviews and use those for other research projects as well. This is also really good to be like, there are some holes in this literature, and it would be great to address that. Second question to ask yourself, do you have 3+ people in your review team? If the answer is no, pick a different review. Any sort of evidence synthesis reviews, your top levels, they need multiple reviewers for unbiased screening. Again, you don't want to go through all of this work and then not be able to be published because there's bias in your article. Do you have 12 to 18 months to commit to a review? Yes or no? If your answer is no, because I graduate in 6 months, then you want to do a rapid review. So rapid reviews are kind of the next level. They fall kind of along the same lines as scoping reviews. So right above randomized control trials, because you could use those in your rapid review. But it's essentially an evidence synthesis that's performed quicker and it's more condensed than your systematic reviews. So the components within the process are very similar to our systematic reviews. However, you cut corners. And by cutting corners, you're able to then produce something in a more short time frame. Rapid reviews are often used to in response to like an urgent scenario or if you need to make a quick decision. So off the top of my head, I could see a lot of rapid reviews around COVID coming out in like 2022, right? So we're trying to synthesize all this evidence that's come out on mRNA vaccines, but there's not time to be super rigorous about it. And so we do cut some corners and we do a rapid review. So these can usually be finished in weeks, honestly, probably more like months. And they need to simplify or abbreviate the process. You can do this by abbreviating or making your search string a little more narrow. So things like fewer databases, maybe you limit the terms or add more filters than you normally would, or maybe you're only focusing on secondary sources instead of primary ones. So you can make the search strategy a little more concise. You can also choose to do quicker screenings for fewer studies. So maybe one of you or two of you look at a screenings and you choose to do less articles than like a full systematic review. Maybe you cut some corners in your critical appraisal, the kind of data you gather, any sort of the analysis stage. So this is the way that you would change this from a systematic to a rapid review. All that being said, rapid reviews, they're very flexible in the kinds of templates and protocols that you're supposed to do. But any alterations to what you choose needs to be explicitly explained when you're publishing. So these are similar steps that we did before with some highlights. So instead, when we had our narrative review, you can do that by yourself. You don't necessarily need a team. A rapid review, you need some people to help you out. So you'll want to assemble your review team. You'll also want to create a protocol. Protocols are really important because it essentially says, hey, world, I plan to do this. And then you do your project. And then your paper says, hey, world, this is like my protocol in this way, but there might be some alterations. Here's how we change things. And that's one way you can be transparent between what you planned on doing and what actually happened with your search. So some of that is having eligibility criteria, having some standards and guidelines, developing and registering your protocol, although registration is sometimes optional. With a rapid review, you will also screen the titles and abstracts, and then you will screen full text. Sometimes that can be a single reviewer, but I will say if there's only one person doing the screening process, it does allow a lot of bias into your study. Besides a critical appraisal, you'll also want to look at a risk of bias assessment. So you'll want to talk about what kind of bias might be in the articles that you're trying to synthesize. From there, you extract your data, describe it, tabulate it, synthesize it, and then assess any sort of publication bias. And then, of course, report and then try to get your subject published. So that's our rapid review. Next question. Is your research question a broad topic? Do you have multiple questions? If your answer is yes, then you want to do a scoping review. So scoping reviews are very similar to systematic reviews. They're just as rigorous, sometimes even more so, depending on how many questions you're trying to answer. So it's called scoping because you're trying to scope the entire literature to find the extent and nature of a topic, as well as inform your field, like, hey, there needs to be future reviews or more research in these gaps that I found. This also falls around the same rigor as like rapid reviews, but it's not quite a systematic review. So the scope is a lot broader, which can have some downsides, like it might take a little bit more time than if you had a very focused question like you do with systematic meta-analyses. Lots of like the protocol is optional. However, it's highly suggested, as well as having methodology, inclusion, exclusion criteria. You want to identify all of that before actually performing a scoping review. With scoping reviews, you also need to search gray literature. So those are anything else that might fall under your information, but wouldn't be like in a database. So the last scoping review I performed, I searched a lot of these conference presentations, and I did that by going to a conference website, going back 5 years and doing a control F to find and look through all of the proceedings that might be on the topic of the people. And so I was able to find maybe 10, 12, 15 relevant studies in that gray literature. And then if they wanted to go forward with that, then they would need to contact those people to get that information. So hand searching, gray literature, looking through citations, contacting experts, all of that is involved when you're doing gray lit searching. And you want to do that with a scoping review. If you're only searching databases with a scoping review, that's not enough. There are lots of standardized templates. Scoping reviews have gotten more popular, and so they do have some standardized templates and questionnaires that you can use. Prisma SCR is one of them that we use often. And the methodology is becoming more standardized, but there are still optional steps within this review. These are some of the steps that differ from our rapid review. So your review team needs to have at least 3 people. It's even better if there's more or some subject experts on there. There are specific standards and guidelines for doing a scoping review like Prisma SCR. You can register your protocol. If you do, there are places like Open Science Framework, which is also a great place to search if you're looking for any sort of reviews that are happening. But it's essentially like a repository where you can say, this is the review that I'm wanting to do. Your database searching should be 3 to 5 databases for it to be comprehensive. We already talked about gray literature. And then you want at least 2 reviewers to screen both your title and abstract as well as your full text, with an optional 3rd reviewer to say, like, to figure out if one person said yes, one person said no. You want a tiebreaker in there who is someone who has not done the review yet. Part of the writing the report, there are Prisma SCR standards that you can write your report with. And in this is where you start to talk about what your search string is and then list all of the databases that you searched. So the idea for our scoping review is that it is reproducible, that a librarian could look at your search string and know exactly what you did, be able to put it in and get the same kinds of results that you did, and make sure that you're doing it correctly. So that is some of the differences between a scoping review and some of our other reviews. Okay, I'm tired of talking, so we're gonna let Charlotte continue with the other three reviews that we're going to talk about.
So if you're not already tired of reviews, we have a few more for you. So the next one is, do you want your review to be looking at only systematic reviews? And if that is a yes, there's a special review for that called an umbrella review. And if you note, the umbrella review is just slightly above the systematic review because it's aggregating all the data from systematic review. Um, you would use this type of review if you found your topic already had a ton of systematic reviews on that topic, but maybe they need some comparison. Maybe they don't agree. Maybe there's different interventions that they said were best or something like that. And of course, there's a bunch of different names for umbrella reviews. So out in the wild, when you're searching, you may see all of these different types: reviews of reviews, meta reviews, and overviews of reviews. So the components are especially driven by the high volume of systematic reviews. And it gives that summary that you need to kind of aggregate all that data in all of those systematic reviews to make a policy or make a guideline. You can condense the broad scope with different types of questions. Maybe you're doing different interventions for the same problem, different methods for the same intervention, or different populations for the same intervention. And the systematic review quality is assessed in these to make sure that their quality to be included into your umbrella review. So the steps, like a systematic review, are very similar. The main thing you're going to want to be looking at is, if your standards and guidelines, you're going to look at Prisma or some other guideline. Maybe there's an article that gives you a good outline of how your umbrella review should go. You will want to search systematic review specific databases like Cochrane, and 3 to 5 of those if you can find them. A lot of databases will have systematic reviews in them. You just have to search for them specifically with filters. For gray literature, you're going to want to search for those unpublished systematic reviews, and they can be unpublished because they are just for a hospital to make a decision about a policy. Now, the next part, you will critically appraise those systematic reviews to make sure, again, that they are quality, that they should be included. And then, of course, at the end, when you're writing your report, you're going to want to follow those Prisma standards as well. So the next question, do you have a well-formulated, narrow research question? If no, then you're going to want to go back, because systematic reviews require clear research questions. You can consider those other review types we've talked about. If you have multiple questions, you're going to want to try the scoping review, for example. So if yes, then we have the systematic review. And you can see that the systematic review is just barely below the umbrella review and the meta-analysis on that top of the evidence pyramid. So it's going to give you a comprehensive summary and evaluation of all that existing research on your topic. And it's going to help you identify patterns, gaps, and conclusions that you can make based on each of the articles that you include. So then they're used to make clinical practice guidelines, policy decisions, and other things. The components are using a framework for your question, like PICO. Does it have to be PICO? No, there's multiple different frameworks you can use. You don't have to use a framework, but it's really good to use a framework because it'll help you make sure that you get a good question that you can kind of piece out when you're working on your search. Certainly comprehensive database searching through multiple databases, having predefined eligibility criteria, that inclusion or exclusion criteria, to make sure that you stay on task and you don't include a bigger scope than what you planned, because the larger the scope, the more information you have to aggregate in your review. Studies are critically appraised for quality and bias. Relevant data is extracted and analyzed, and the results are synthesized through statistical methods. So the difference in these steps is you're going to want that well-defined question with Pico or some other framework. You're going to want to be sure you have a comprehensive full team of experts, content experts, a librarian, a statistician. If you don't have that, that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, okay? But typically, we help on these with faculty. You're going to want a faculty member to kind of guide you if you're not a subject expert. And you're definitely going to want to consult with people who are statisticians or do that kind of research to help you get through that. There are standards specifically for Prisma. And so when you're asking us questions about how to do a systematic review, we're going to point you back to what the standards say. And if you choose not to follow the standards, that's your choice. But we always go back to the standards. We don't say you can't do that, but you may get questions when you try to publish. The registry is important for systematic reviews. You want to make sure that you check the registry ahead of time, and you want to make sure you register it, your protocol, so that people know what you're doing and they don't try to repeat your research, and vice versa. You're not repeating somebody else's research. And then again, back at writing the report, you're going to want to follow those Prisma standards as well. Do you want a statistical analysis of the method's results and quality? If no, then there isn't any other options. Okay, you're going to want to go back to those review options. But if yes, this is the meta-analysis. We get a lot of questions about this. It is always paired with a systematic review. So you should see a title that says systematic review with meta-analysis almost always somehow in the title or the description or abstract. And so it's paired and it combines data from multiple similar studies to develop conclusions with a higher statistical power. And you can see it's at the very top of our evidence pyramids. That means it's the best evidence. It's considered the best evidence. So I already said it's at the top, but you do have to match all your study types within a review, which cannot always be easy. So for example, you might only synthesize random control trials. You can avoid publication bias by including unpublished and published studies, and it can require that advanced statistical knowledge that I pointed out earlier that can help you. You can get a consultant, you can reach out to people in your department who may have more skills in statistics, but it's super important when you're talking about a meta-analysis. So as far as the steps, you're going to want to still keep it narrow and specific like you did with your systematic review. You're going to be seeking comparable data so that you can compare it easily with those statistical analysis. You're going to extract data with a numerical outcome, variance, etc. And then when you're interpreting your findings, you're going to use those statistical methods to make sure that you get that meta-analysis information within your topic. So we've kind of summarized everything that we've talked about today in this comparing reviews. And I'm not going to go over each one. Just know that the abbreviations can be really important because you can see when you're talking about like certain reviews, you may see SCR or SR or UR when they're talking about reviews. Note that only the top 5 that we're talking about are reproducible. The narrative review is not. And there's just a whole other host of limitations. A lot of the limitations are time and work intensive. Okay. Rapid review is going to be a little easier, and your narrative review is going to be a little easier on that. But the rest of them are going to take a lot of time. So key tools for reviews. Covidence is a big one. It is an online platform that's going to help you with your screening process. It streamlines that and takes down the percentage of time that you have to spend screening, because all you have to do is import your references into Covidence from your citation manager. and it will help you do that each step of that screening. It will help you do the Prisma flow chart that a lot of people include with their reviews. It does that for you automatically. And so you have an image that you can include on your paper when you do a review. And of course, it helps you with data extraction as well. JBI will kind of do a similar situation as the online platform that will help with appraisal, implementation, and management of your systematic review or other type of review. EndNote, of course, is our citation manager for on campus. You don't have to use EndNote. If you have Zotero or if you have another citation manager you use, we recommend as long as you have one to use it. But we will help you troubleshoot EndNote, and we teach classes on EndNote. So, and finally, LibKey. We always say start out with your research with a citation manager and LibKey. LibKey is a very powerful tool. It is a extension on your browser, and it'll basically identify you as a UNT Health student, faculty, or staff. And even if you're searching on Google Scholar, out in PubMed, it'll identify you and give you one-click access to full text, which is really helpful when you're trying to determine if you want to include an article in your narrative review or whatever. All right, so how can the library help? We will give review overviews. So we will teach you kind of like what we're doing now. We will have a consultation with you and we will talk to you about the different types of reviews and help you formulate a question. We will instruct students, faculty, and staff on the different tools that we just talked about. And systematic searching, we will help you choose databases. We will help you formulate a search string, and we will help you find those full text articles so that you can do those full text screenings for your review. What we will not do for students is we will not do the search for you. Okay. So we can show you how, we can consult with you, but you have to do the search yourself. So we do have some references if you're interested. And that concludes the class. So if you have time before you leave, if you would please do a quick survey on the class. And just so you know, this is the first of our series of classes, and those classes are listed that are coming up. So from Pico to Protocol, Advanced Searching, and Data Extraction Tools will be on the docket for the next few classes that we do in the next couple of months.
Also, while you're doing that, does anybody have any questions? Because we can take those as well.
I just like to have one when we were talking about the systematic reviews. Do you guys have like status or their statisticians here, like on campus who can help? Or when you said like you might need a statistician's help, like where would we go for that?
In my experience, it's usually by college. Somebody in the college knows somebody who is really good at it. And sometimes it's somebody in that college, and sometimes it's somebody in another college. So it depends. We usually ask students to go back to their advisors. I know there is somebody that helps faculty with research and statistics, but I don't know that there's somebody specific on campus that helps with students. And so it's usually on a case-by-case basis by college, I think.
Yeah, the library, we are experts in searching. Statistics, not so much. So you don't want us to perform your statistical analysis as much as we might want to help with that.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you guys so much.